Hi there, this is Artur Eismond, speaking to you from Sydney. I am a software engineer building web apps for last 10 years. I'm mainly working with PHP and related technologies, and I would like to show you something I have been working on for a while, something that I'm actually quite excited about, and I think it could be actually quite useful. So it's an open source project. Its name is phpProxyBuilder. It is all about proxy design pattern. It's about proxying method calls and doing it in PHP. It's not about web proxies or anything like that. I prepared two code samples, like little snippets, just hacked together, just to show some basic ideas how you could use it. I will use caching as an example today in my samples because it's a really good use case. I think it shows really well how proxy pattern can be used and how you could really benefit from it. So I created one sample which shows more traditional way of caching, where you just implement it somewhere within the kind of business logic or somewhere in your application. And I created another sample showing how you could use it if you used phpProxyBuilder. So I'm very interested in your feedback. I would like to hear from you if you find it interesting, if you get any ideas, if maybe you would like to help me out integrate the package with some PHP frameworks out there. I'll be working on the Symfony 2 integration. It's already in progress, but I could really use some help with other frameworks, and just interested in your feedback. Really, what do you think about it? So I think it's just best to get started. Let's do it. So let's imagine that you want to cache something, right? This code over here is an example of a pretty standard way of caching. So if you wanted to cache something, you would probably do something like here. So if you had a class that's slow or some method that is particularly slow, you would probably create a cache key based on the parameters that were passed from the user, or based on anything else. Then you would somehow obtain an instance of a cache component from your framework or from somewhere else, and you would ask the cache object if the key that you're looking for is in the cache or not. So if the cache is actually there, you will just return it. If the cached object is in there, maybe it expired or it was never there, you will actually generate the new content and then push it back into the cache, right? So as you can see, your class that was supposed to just to generate the content, it was just supposed to do something particular, maybe build a report or call the third-party service or do whatever, something else. Now it suddenly has all this code in it, and as your application grows, you will probably see this chunk of code being copy-pasted all over the application. I have seen that before. And I think it probably happens in many places, that as your needs grow, you start copy-pasting parts of the behavior into different classes, and suddenly everything is coupled to cache. It not only happens with cache, similar things can happen with other behaviors or other logic that will just be spread across different classes just by copy-pasting or doing something like that. So anyway, let's imagine that we have this class that does something slow, and now let's see how the client code would actually use this class. So you probably would create an instance of this class. You'll get an object, and then you'll just start calling it, right? So the first time you call it, it's slow because there was nothing in the cache. You call it again. Now it's fast because the object was actually called loaded from cache. So it's not that bad, and I think it looks pretty simple. But the problem is that, like I said, now this class has to be aware about caching. It has to know how to cache things. And as your application grows, more and more components may need to know about caching. They will have to couple themselves to the cache interface, like here, and they will also have to know how to obtain instances of it, and they will get all this extra code. So when I was working with Spring framework and Grails framework, I learned some basics of aspect-oriented programming, and I really love this idea, and I was really thinking about it for a while. Would it be possible to create this caching behavior just once, to implement it just once, put it in a class or put it somewhere else, and then to be able to reuse it everywhere in your application. So this is how phpProxyBuilder actually was started. I wanted to create my behavior for caching or some other logic in one place and then reuse it everywhere. So this example here shows how the client code and how the implementation of the same class would look like if you would use phpProxyBuilder and the caching advice that comes with it. So first of all, your class doesn't have to know anything about caching, so you can start caching any object without this object being coupled to it, because it works from outside in. So now you create a class and you only implement what this class is really supposed to do. This class doesn't have to know how to cache anything. So as a client of this code, you would now just create an instance of it. You would have to attach your caching advice to it, and then you can start calling the method and it will actually get cached like in the previous example. So the only bit that's a little bit scary is over here, but this will be simplified even further with framework integrations. So I want to provide a bundle for Symfony 2, a module for Zen Framework 2, and if I can find any other contributors, maybe integrations with other frameworks. So you wouldn't actually have to do all of that to get your class cached. This code would actually look a little bit simpler. But if you check out the sources from GitHub right now, it would actually look like this. So what does it mean? First of all, you will need to get the factory. So the factory is actually creating proxies and wrapping your objects with extra behavior on top of it, right? And you also will need to decide what kind of behaviors do you want to attach. So in this case, I want to attach caching advice. My caching advice is a generic implementation, so it will need a caching backend instance. So you would be able to provide APC or memcache or Redis or whatever other file implementation inside here. But again, this will come with framework integrations. So I would not implement caching adapters myself. I would just use the caching adapter from your framework. So if your application is already using a file cache, you will be able to just inject your instance over here as a dependency. So again, here I'm using a caching advice, but I could create my own advice because the framework is like fully extensible. It doesn't care what behaviors you're attaching. Or I could add some other advices like maybe logging, performance metrics, so every time a method is called I increment some counters or I check how long it takes. And a few of these advices, these implementations are already bundled up with the library. So the last step, you would ask the factory to actually create a proxy for you. So you pass your target object that you want proxied, and you attach the behavior that you want to be added on top of your object. So this doesn't do any magic. It doesn't modify PHP code. It doesn't do any special things. It's just creating a few instances of internal classes, of my framework classes, and then delegates calls between them. So from outside, you can use this proxied instance as if it was the original target. So you will just call the do something method with the parameters, and you don't really care what happens in between. This instance here is not really the original target, right? It's actually a proxy around it. So it has some special behavior like caching. So what is the result? What's the result of this approach? So first of all, your class, your business logic, does only what it's supposed to do. It can have a single responsibility. It does not have to know how to log. It doesn't have to know how to cache, how to handle some special types of maybe errors, or implement some other patterns like circuit breaker, which I will create a separate screencast for. It just generates the data or the report, or does whatever it has to do, which is very important design principle, to just have one single responsibility. The second thing that we gain is that the class is not coupled to the cache component anymore. So as you add more different behaviors through the proxy, you don't need your code to be coupled to these things that you want them to do. This class has never has to change, right? I added caching on top of it, but this code stays as it was. So if I unit test it once, it works. I don't have to come back and worry about it. What if I now start counting how many times this method was called, because I want some nice graphs, performance metrics or whatever. So it's also a benefit that your class is decoupled, so it can be used with the cache or it can be used without the cache. So at runtime you can decide what behaviors you want to attach. In some context, maybe caching is a bad idea. Maybe it should not be happening, right? So then what? You have to add extra parameters to decide cache or not cache. You don't want that. Your class is doing what it's supposed to do, and you use it in a way that's relevant. So you add caching on top or you don't. And the thing that I really love about it is that you only write your caching logic once. So actually in this case you don't have to write it at all, because I already created a caching advice for you. Possibly you could extend this implementation if you wanted to, or replace it with something else. Maybe you have extra requirements about what kind of caching keys should be generated. Maybe there are some extra parameters or whatever that has to be taken into account. But the point still stands that you only do it once. You only would implement caching logic in one place. And finally, you can add more behavior. So this target instance could be wrapped around with more different advices that would do different things for you. So let's not go quickly to the GitHub and have a look at one more thing. So alright, I added unit test, I have full test coverage, there is a little bit of documentation here, little samples of code, and what I want to talk about now is the diagrams, the delegation of calls. So when you call your target directly, like here the blue thing is the target object, so the slow service, the green thing is the client code. So whenever you call a method on the target, PHP just executes the method directly on the object. The object does whatever it has to do, and then returns the response back to the client code. So there is nothing special about it. You have direct instance, direct reference to the object here, and you just call a method on it. So when you start using the phpProxyBuilder, the situation gets a little bit more complicated, but you don't have to really worry about it. It's just important to know what happens behind the scenes. So what now happens is that your client code asks factory for the proxy, right? And the proxy is actually this object here, but you don't have to know about it. These two white objects here are actually my internal implementations, parts of the framework. They are generic, and you don't even have to know that they exist. You still use this object as if it was the original target. So as you can see, you will just call the methods that you wanted to call, right? But this proxy has some extra logic in it, so it will know that it should actually first execute all the extra behavior that you want to attach on top of the target, right? So in our case, I wanted to cache calls, so I want to execute my cache advice first and see what it has to say. Maybe the call can be cached. So in this case, it would never call the target; it would just check the cache and return the response. Because this object now controls what will happen, right? So it can just go for the cache, return the response. And here you could also have a whole sequence of these cache objects in between. So it doesn't have to be just one instance and one behavior. You can attach as many different types of behavior in between as you want. So anyway, this object decides if it wants to proceed in the chain of the execution, or does it want to return the response back to the client. So if it decides to proceed, it will actually go through another layer of indirection, and then finally the target object will be called with the method that was intended, right? So if the cache result wasn't there, the target object gets called and it can do its thing and return the response without knowing that it's being cached. And then here at this point, the cache provider can actually save it back into cache, right? So the next time when the method call comes in, it will actually be able to find the cached result and return it without calling the target. So this is pretty cool and pretty complicated. So you can maybe have a look at it for a moment. The important part here is that, as you can see, there are two white layers here, and these are two white layers of indirection, right? So indirection means that my green code doesn't directly know or call this guy, right? It goes through a certain layer of indirection, right? So what it allows us to do is, for example, we can inject at runtime a caching advice in between, or some other advice, or maybe a few of them, right? Because this guy has a reference to my proxy, right? It never has a reference directly to this object or to that object. It only knows about that, and it has to go through my layer of indirection. And what it also gives us is the ability of decoupling each of these components, which is really powerful. So let's go from this side. So the target object doesn't know about anything. It has no clue about how it's being used, who is using it, that there is some caching involved, or whatever else is happening. It's just calculating the result, the whatever report, or doing some calculations. And this is exactly what you want. You want your business classes, your application logic to be focused on doing what it's supposed to do, right? This guy here, the advice, has no idea about client nor the target. It's completely unaware. It doesn't care. It's actually implemented only once, and you probably don't have to modify it ever. Like maybe if you want some magical, cache key generation or stuff like that, you could replace it with your own implementation. But still, it would only be created once, and then it can be applied for any type of class. So in this case, it's a slow class. In other case, maybe it will be some report generator, or maybe you create some I don't know, statistics service or whatever. So this caching advice class will not care about what it's caching. It will also not care who is using it. So it only is coupled to these two guys on this side, right? There is some internal communication protocol, like I have interfaces in between these two. So the caching advice only has to know how to fulfill a certain interface for this entire framework to work. But it can be reused. It can be reused for any target, for any class that you add in, and this is really the power. And on this side again, the client doesn't have to know about this part either, right? So the client is really only coupled to the target. It doesn't have to know that the caching advice or anything in between exists, and this is really what you want. So if I was to implement a client class using some target, I would use dependency injection. So I would just depend that I will get an instance of target object from somewhere, right? I will get the instance of the class that I'm supposed to use, and I will use it as if it was the target object. If it happens to be some proxy in between, or if it happens to have some extra logic, I don't care. For me, it's the target object that I'm expecting, and I'm calling the do something method. These guys in between here, they don't have any clue about this method name or this object or me, right? They are generic. They can do the thing that they are good at. So this way by using the phpProxyBuilder, you can start decoupling your components and reusing some like generic implementations. So I can show you the caching advice, just so you would have like a quick view. It's really like 70 lines of code. It's really generic, as you can see. I would expect implementation of a cache backend. Then here I just create the cache key. I ask the cache if there is already a value for it or not. I proceed, which means now it will delegate to the original target, and when I get the response, I put it back in a cache, right? So there are a few things here that are really borrowed from aspect-oriented programming, and it really looks similar. If you're familiar with aspect-oriented programming, you will right away know that this is a round advice, that this is the joint point. I try to keep the naming similar so people would be more familiar with these ideas. Another example of an advice, again 100 lines of code that can be reused for any object, for any type of class that you have in your system, is instrumentation advice. I really love metrics. I love counters, timers. I love to know what my application is doing. So now, by attaching this instrumentation advice on top of my object, I will get counters and timers for every method call. So anytime a method is called, the counter of particular name structured in a particular way, like an automated generated key, will be created, and also the time spent within the method will be calculated. I will also know if it was a success or an error, because I'm catching exceptions here and throwing them out again. So I'm also counting if the method call was successful or there was an exception thrown. And maybe the last one, like really simple one, is a closure device. So this would let you create any like anonymous function and throw it inside here, and actually this function would be invoked before the target method is called. But maybe you wouldn't even have to do that, because you would just implement my interface, and you would be good to go. The interface of the proxy builder, the interface of the proxy advice is really simple. You just need one method. You just need to get familiar with what does this do, and you're ready to go. So this is my first screencast ever. So sorry for the bad quality of the sound and no special effects. I'm really eager to hear some feedback from you guys. So send me an email. You can catch me on GitHub. My email is acemod.arthur, not dash, acemod.arthur at gmail.com, or send me a message on GitHub, or find me on LinkedIn or whatever. I'm really keen to get some feedback. What are your ideas? What do you think about it? Maybe get some help with implementation of different integrations for different frameworks. If you have some framework of choice and you think this is really something you would like to use, then let me know, and maybe we can work together to create an extension for you, so other people can adopt it easily. And this is really it. This is it for today. Thanks a lot for listening, and see you on PHP meetups in Sydney or online. See you. Thanks.